Hello everyone, and welcome to The Writing Engineer. Today we're going to be discussing outlines. Whether you do them, whether you don't do them, I think everybody, in some form or other, has an outline. Now, those of you who write by the seat of your pants, sometimes known as pantsers, will say, I don't use an outline, I just write whatever comes to me. Well, that's true. But you don't usually sit down to write a story without at least having some idea of where to begin, what's going to happen, and where it's going to end. That, whether you want to admit it or not, is an outline. Now, everybody outlines to some extent or other, some less, some more. Now, if you're Stephen King, you keep the entire thing in your head until you're ready to sit down and write the whole thing out. If you're Brandon Sanderson, you write a 30-page document beforehand, and then you sit down to write your 700-page manuscript. Now, I've found that I myself, while I do believe that I am an outliner, I have a couple different ways that I actually do it. So for my first book, called Amara's Law, I went rather overboard in my outline. For example, the first outline that I wrote was out by hand. You can see here my chicken scratch handwriting. Then I went ahead and did a lot more detail on the outlines. I typed it up and ended up with something that looks a little bit more like what you may have seen in your English classes. Now, try and get that right there. See, we've got, the titles here, we have the numbers, the A's, B's, and C's, and all that other stuff. And then I went even one step further. I actually expanded, and I'm going to pull up my big binder here, or at least a couple of pages. I went and expanded each of the chapters so that when I was doing them, I would know exactly what I was going to be writing and when. Then I followed through my outline, and I actually changed things as I saw fit, depending on how the story was going at the time. Now, one of the other books that I'm writing, the Tooth Fairy Chronicles, I did a little bit differently. That started off as a writing prompt and quickly evolved into a story that I like and is definitely going to be of novel length. But for that, I did this. Now here you can see all I have are major bullet points going up and down the page. There's no numbers, there's no letters, there's no way to call it an official outline, although it does keep track of the action from the beginning of the book to the end. Each one of those story beats, as I believe that they're called, is the next action phase in the story. I fill things in as I see fit and add things as I see fit. And somewhere in between lies, where I believe that I happen to be in terms of outlining. Now, how you outline and what you outline and how much you outline is completely up to you. You should never let anyone tell you otherwise. You should never let a person say, oh, well, you must outline this way. It has to be done like this, it has to be done like that. That's all fake. What you really have to do is follow however much you believe that you need to get your story moving in the right direction. Sometimes that direction changes halfway through the book, sometimes it doesn't. Brandon Sanderson, the person who took over for Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series, tends to outline extensively. He creates the entire story on paper first. His outlines are usually 30 pages, as I mentioned before. He generally outlines extensively and then fills in the details afterwards. People like Stephen King, and he is one of a kind, will generally keep the story in his head, mulling it over for a while. I believe in his book On Writing, he mentioned mulling over a story in his head for a year or so before he sat down and wrote the entire thing. I do not recommend doing this if you are anyone other than Stephen King. He is special. He is an exception. For most of us, we should be writing down at least something to keep our writing from meandering off into the deep forests of speculation and other random things. So, outlining. How do we do it? When do we do it? Well, outlining is as simple as figuring out the big steps that your story needs to take. If you search online or on YouTube for Dan Wells' 7-part outlining series, you'll find that he has a schematic on how to outline your story. He likes to take 7 different sections of the story, divide them all up, and then you can fill in little bits and details from using those 7 sections. There's the beginning, there's the end, and he has all these little divisions in the middle. Some of them are called major story points, some of them are called minor story points. But the point is, he keeps track of his stories going from beginning to end. At the very least, keeping track of the major story points. You know, the big turns and when the climax should happen, that type of thing. Those are sometimes very useful if you're having trouble getting started with your outline. I tended to do a few more than that. My first story ended up being 20 chapters. It started off as 17, went down to 14, and then ended up being 20. And that happened as I realized that I needed to include or remove certain things from the story as I was writing. Now, there are lots of different methods. One is called the snowflake method, which I don't fully understand and I will not expound upon here. That's just something that you're going to have to look up online yourself. I tend to follow, if I'm going to do an outline, a traditional outline, I tend to follow the one that you learn in English class, where you start with the Roman numeral 1, you put in a chapter title or a major plot point, then you go through your A's, B's, C's, and D's, lining up subpoints under that major plot point, and then if you need to go even further, you can go to 1s, 2s, and 3s, or lowercase i's, all descending in order of importance. And when I write, I try and make sure that I hit most of these points. And usually, as I'm writing, I will check that outline from time to time, making sure that I'm keeping on track, and I will find that sometimes I have wandered off of track, and then I will write myself back onto track before I get too far. We've all heard of writers writing themselves into a corner, and following your outline is one of the ways that you can avoid that, or at least make a decent attempt at avoiding that. J.K. Rowling herself actually ran into a problem writing herself into a corner, I believe, or so it has been told. If you believe that you don't want to stick to the standard English model of outlining, you can just do as I did in my second story. Write out one point, then go to the next major point, then go to another, and another, and another. There's no need to keep track of which ones are big, which ones are medium, which ones are small, just so long as you keep track of how your story needs to flow from one point to the next. The stuff that's up here comes in between. That's the point where you free write. You think, oh, this will be great if I include this here, or put this interaction there, or get my main character shot, or into the hospital, or, you know, whatever other damage you're going to do to them. So, that's my idea on outlines. What people do, what people don't, and how everyone, whether they believe that they're a plotter, or a pantser, or I believe the term is a plantser, that everyone, to some extent, has some form of outline, because otherwise we're sitting down to write with no idea what we're going to write at all. And those stories tend to be meandering and wandering, without much point. Now, you can disagree with me. That's fine. If that's how you write, great. But I believe that some of the best stories are the ones that have a purpose, a direction, and a motivation. And those of you in the military may recognize those 3 particular words. Always give your main character a purpose. Always point them in a direction. It doesn't matter what direction. It could be a good direction, it could be a bad direction, as long as it's a direction. They need something to move towards. And there's no point in getting them to move towards anything unless they have some sort of motivation to get to the end. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's content. If you did, please click the like button. If you want to know immediately when my next video comes up, click the little bell below. I believe it's actually somewhere over here. And you'll be notified as soon as my next video comes up. As always, I look forward to your comments. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.